CFL 110, your weekly trip around the biggest stories in the Canadian Football League with Jeff Hamilton and Andrew Hustler Paterson. Presented by Garage Living Winnipeg.
What is going on, CFL fans? Welcome to another edition of CFL 110, all over the three-down game north of the border here on the Winnipeg Sports Talk channel. Great to have you all with us. We've got a big show today as we come down to the short strokes of the CFL regular season and look ahead to the playoffs not too far away. Andrew Paterson and Jeff Hamilton with you. As we get into the program, a big thank you to our presenting sponsor, Garage Living Winnipeg, who has been presenting CFL 110 all season long. We're now into October, gang. And if you want to have a clean, organized garage this fall before the snow flies, give our friends at Garage Living Winnipeg a call at 204-999-1234. Our pal Pat's been getting a ton of calls as soon as school hit. People are suddenly seeing all those kids' bikes, hockey equipment, football equipment, you name it, strewn all over the garage. Well, Garage Living has an innovative solution called Slatwall. Dozens of hooks, baskets, and shelves that clip into it to get everything off your floor. There's even a cool golf club caddy and tire racks to store those winter tires. And the cool thing is you can do as much or as little of it as you want to fit your budget. Don't miss your chance to clear the clutter, organize, and beautify your garage with Slatwall. Garage Living also offers polyaspartic floor coatings, made in Canada premium metal cabinetry for a total garage makeover. Check out their amazing work at their website at garageliving.com and give Pat Kanuga a call, 204-999-1234 to book a free in-garage consultation or make an appointment to meet him in their showroom at 981 Main Street. Garage Living Winnipeg, garages made for living. All right, Hammer. I'm back in the peg. You were here for a couple days, and now you are the hammer in the hammer, getting ready for the Bombers and Ticats on Friday night. But great to chop it up again after another wild weekend in the CFL, where the playoff picture is becoming a little clearer right now.
It's great to be here. The Hammer has welcomed me with pure sunshine. It feels a lot like Winnipeg here. That being said, this Ticats team, man, I'm in the epicenter of what's the feel-good story of this week. Seems to be following the Winnipeg Blue Bombers from week to week. As we know, Edmonton was also riding high before the Bombers decimated their hopes of the playoffs, and we'll get into that. But great to be here. One final thing, got my 18 over par hat on to honor Jordan and his commitment to Manitoba Major Junior Hockey League and flying back from Montreal, as you heard on my hit yesterday. That was quite impressive stuff. So ready to go, locked and loaded. Another wild week, man, in the CFL, and what's been many of them this year.
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, I was in Montreal all weekend for the President's Cup, which was amazing. Saw JR there for both of his trips to Montreal on the weekend. But it was great. You know, we did golf all day, and then, Friday saddled up at one of the local establishments and watched the Bombers beat the living crap out of the Edmonton Elks. I will be honest, at the beginning of the week, I think I took the Bombers to cover the spread, which was 5. And the more I thought about it as we got closer, knowing that the Elks were playing for their playoff lives, that McLeod Bethel Thompson, who's had some success against Winnipeg in the past, was starting, still thought the Bombers would win, but I thought this would be a closer game. It was anything but, and they hit a new level, especially in the first half in that game, in a 55-27 absolute beatdown of the Elks. I don't know what to say more about the Bombers other than, they have played very difficult home-and-home series this year against BC, swept them. And that was at a time where they were 2-6. Saskatchewan swept them. And then with Edmonton, with all the momentum that they built after that 0-7 start, handily took care of them, running away with the game in Edmonton in the fourth quarter, winning by 14, and then beating the daylights out of this team and coming close to ending their playoff hopes last Friday. from where I sit, it seems like the Bombers got rid of a lot of bad luck and a lot of ugly play early on in the season and are now rounding into form to take another legitimate run at the Grey Cup. And they could book the West Final for I guess it's not the 5th straight year, but a trip to their 5th straight Grey Cup, a game at home in Winnipeg if they win this week and the Saskatchewan Roughriders are able to beat the Edmonton Elks. But thoughts on that Bomber performance on Friday and where this team is at after such a concerning start for fans of the blue and gold in the middle of the country?
It's funny, Huss, because I think there were some people in and around the organization quietly. I'm not suggesting any of the players in the locker room said as much, but I think there were some people close to the Bombers organization that were curious about how well they'd fare in those 2 games. And, we talked about it before about how much impact it would have on the West standings, not just for the entire group, but specifically for these 2 teams. And Edmonton had the opportunity. We'll get into that after this, but Edmonton had the opportunity to leapfrog the Winnipeg Blue Bombers into first place in the West with those 2 games ahead of them. Clearly, that did not happen. And here you have the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, a team that mind you, Huss. I mean, we talked a lot about the 0-4 start and then the 2-6 before rattling off what's now 7 straight victories to be atop the division. But even in those low times, if you will, traveling from city to city, seeing the teams as they arrive here in Winnipeg and talking to them for their availability, there was always a ton of respect for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Everyone, even 2 weeks ago when I was in Edmonton talking to McLeod Bethel Thompson, I mean, he's just one example. People still refer to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers as the champs. They always correct themselves. Well, West champs the last couple of years, right? Particularly talking to those West teams. But there's always been a respect whether you've been in East and West. This year, teams have had a reason to be scared of this club's defense. What we've seen from this defense under Jordan Younger, new defensive coordinator. We all know what happened over the offseason, him taking over for Richie Hall, who's still on the staff and still plays a role with that defense. But this really is, the brainchild of Jordan Younger. And I mean, it's a special group. Now that the offense seems to be turning a corner, and I know it's easy to look at this game and go, yeah, wow, that was a real, a real violent attack on the Elks. But this kind of been leading towards this. I don't want to say it's been snowballing into this incredible 6 touchdown performance from Zach Collaros, but the offense has been better, really, dating back to Labor Day weekend when Zach played a great first half before being headbutted and missing the second half. I mean, again, it hasn't been stellar performances in and throughout each week following that game, but it has been better results as an offense. And I think the takeaways in that game beyond the Zach Collaros performance, because let's face it, I think he needed this. I think he needed it for his own confidence, for his own psyche. Here's the thing about Zach Collaros, man, is he's a guy that, things weigh on him. Everything weighs on him all the time. When the Bombers were riding high and, we're atop the division all season long, this guy took home with him, the missed passes, the errant passes, the interceptions. So that, he's on himself this season, particularly for his performance. So to have a 6 interception game, he actually moves into a positive touchdown to interception ratio.
Not 6 picks.
Sorry, 6 touchdowns. 6 touchdowns. Goes into 15 touchdowns and 14 interceptions. So he actually has more touchdowns now than he has interceptions, which hasn't been the case all season long. But then aside from that, Kenny Lawler, we talked about this last week. Like, Kenny Lawler needs to get going. He missed obviously a handful of games with a broken arm that he suffered in the season opener, but in the games that he returned from, he hadn't been the Kenny Lawler that a lot of people expected him to be. That highlight reel catching Kenny Lawler, who comes into training camp and says he wants to be set records, have a historic season. Well, finally we saw the Kenny Lawler that a lot of people are accustomed to, and then we saw Nick Dembski, another guy who hasn't really been taking the league by storm this year after recording his first 1,000-yard season last year. So, it was good to see him get into the end zone twice. And then you have, the additions of Carrick Wheatfall, who's back at it. He got into the end zone as well. You have, Ontario Wilson, who's probably been their best receiver this year. And so things are happening for this team on offense. And, I mentioned defense was scary. Now the offense is starting to catch up. They're not not nearly close to where the level of the defense is playing. We're not about to say this Bombers team is led by their attack. It's certainly been a defensive team, but man, the Bombers are scary. They're playing their best football at the best time, and while they haven't locked up first in the West, they can do so this weekend with a win and the Saskatchewan Roughriders loss. And that is something that we would have, even a month ago, we would have been talking about being a very uphill battle. 2 months ago, we probably would have called it impossible.
I mean, since the eighth game of the season, when the Bombers were 2-6, they've won out. And meanwhile, everyone else in the West has hit significant skids. Well, with the exception of the Elks, who started off the season with their 7-game skid and now, of course, have lost 2 games in a row. Just a quick mention on Jordan Younger. The job he's done with this Blue Bomber defense taking over for Richie Hall has been absolutely 5-star. When this offense wasn't clicking, the defense was the catalyst to get them going in the right direction. They've continued to play at a very, very high level. And I meant to mention this last week. I didn't see as much of him on the TV in the game against the Elks on the weekend from Winnipeg. But I'm not sure a professional coach has ever been on the sideline with so much swag and such a sick outfit than the one that he wore in Edmonton the week before, with that satin starter jacket and that hat.
I didn't even see it.
You know what? I wish I'd screen grabbed it or something like that. It was a look, and I'll tell you what, look good, feel good, coach good. That's exactly what he's doing right now.
And you don't even take into consideration all the injuries that the defense had at the beginning of the year, right? And how they had to get through that. And it's a really different look. I mean, their versatility has been the name of the game. If you'll notice, I know, a lot of people are sending emails earlier on in the season. Why are so many guys subbing in and out of defense? It seemed like it's something that was going to blow up in their faces. It certainly has not.
No, he has been a great and probably under-discussed story in Winnipeg with what's happened so far this season. Moving on to the Elks, and we'll get to the Ticats in this Bomber game on the weekend coming up in a minute. It was, to use your words, a fun story while it lasted, but with back-to-back losses to the Bombers, the Elks now look like they are pretty much cooked. They're not eliminated, but they're 5-10. BC has 7 wins. Saskatchewan has 7 wins and a tie. Realistically, they could go 3-0, and if BC went 1-2, they could catch them and get 3rd place in the West. Other than that, I mean, there's no chance of them getting a crossover now with Toronto and Ottawa both having 8 wins. So we're just about at next year's season for the Elks, although they do have Saskatchewan at home this week. They can play for another week and keep their playoff hopes alive with a win. But let's just assume that these 2 losses to Winnipeg was sort of the end of a pretty inspiring run for the club after that terrible start. They've got an interim GM, head coach, a new owner. Where do the Elks go from here? And what will you be paying attention to in these final 3 games based on the uncertainty for this franchise and everybody in the building moving forward?
Yeah, it is a fascinating dynamic. I wish I was a fly on the wall of Larry Thompson, the new owner's office wall, because I'd just love to know what he's thinking right now. Like to your point, Huss, there's still something to play for with the Elks. There's still, faint playoff hopes. There's still respect and pride to play for, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, they still have they still have a city that they play in front of, and they can really turn what was a dismal start to the season into a somewhat happy ending, even if it doesn't mean a chance at competing for the Grey Cup. Just putting them in the right space, right, the right place, and that's the question that Larry Thompson needs to figure out here, is if these guys are Jarius Jackson as head coach, G. Roy Simon as interim general manager, if these are the men that he wants leading this organization into the future. And I think if the Elks have a different fate over the last 2 weeks, and all of a sudden Edmonton is climbing the West standings and is talking about clinching a playoff spot potentially in the next week or so, then yeah, I think it's almost an easy decision to re-up these guys, to realize that this group sans Chris Jones is up to snuff, is up to the challenge of bringing this organization, this once proud organization, back to respectability. But if you don't make the playoffs, I don't, fairly or unfairly, I just don't think, I think you get rid of everything. I think you clean house, and that's no disrespect, to either of those, man. I think that Jarius Jackson has done a phenomenal job as head coach, rallying, a group of players who would have had their, worlds rocked with the loss of Chris Jones, a guy who, controlled everything and made all the decisions for the most part for the organization. So to have an inevitable couple hiccups to start, but then to pick up and win games and be considered among the hottest teams in the CFL as the Elks were 2 weeks ago, that's good, but I don't know if that's good enough to get an extension. The reality is, you don't bring in a staff to come in for one more season and see what you can do. You either sign them to multi-year extensions or you bring in a new group. And personally, and again, nothing personally against Jarius Jackson. Now, I don't think Geroy Simon is a great GM. He's a first-time GM. I thought it was interesting too, post Chris Jones' firing, about, reporters and media asking him how he wanted to handle this as his team now. This has kind of always been Geroy Simon's team. He has his fingerprints on a lot of the pickups. He was the guy that re-signed Dylan Mitchell and Kevin Brown to new deals midway through their rookie contracts. So, there's been some hiccups along the way for him too. And anyway, I just think it comes down to, if you want a fresh slate, if you want to bring in new blood, have a new aura around the team, I think you got to get rid of everything that Chris Jones touched. And that's including his coaching staff and his personnel, all of which he handpicked, none of which I think he thought would take over for him. So, all those things considered, again, I think there's opportunities for those guys elsewhere in the CFL. I just don't know if I'm the owner of the Edmonton Elks, if I want to go with the same group, despite the brief, albeit success that they've had. And the other thing too is, it's very interesting about the future of Trey Ford. The way he's been treated, we all know how he's been treated by Chris Jones. I'm convinced that Chris Jones drafted him in the first round not to be a quarterback, but to play another position, to be an ultimate athlete, whether he, turned to the defense or was excelled on special teams and whatnot. And then Jarius Jackson has shown belief in Trey Ford on a couple different occasions, bringing him in first after his promotion to offensive coordinator, and then again after he became head coach, decided to ride with Trey Ford too. So, but I just still don't know, what the Ford effect, if you will, in all this plays into it. Does Trey Ford want to come back? Does he want to sign a new deal? Is he going to be the number one guy? Do you want Trey Ford to be the number one guy? I know there's a lot of people out there in this country that believe Trey Ford can lead a team to victories. We've certainly seen it. Can he lead a team to a Grey Cup? That's obviously still to be determined. And, what we saw against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in his last start, mind you, it did come after missing a few games to injury, did not look like a number one quarterback. And I would not be surprised if a new GM or even Geroy Simon, if he does come back next season, will necessarily want to put all their eggs in his basket. We'll wait and see. I am a fan of Trey Ford. I believe it, but I don't have my job risking on it. So I am incredibly curious. What do you think about that?
We've been on the other side of this. I think they blew it with their starting quarterback in both of the Winnipeg games. I thought that McLeod Bethel Thompson should have started that first one at home, considering the run that he was on. And considering what happened, and obviously if they had lost that game, I thought, the game in Winnipeg was a perfect opportunity to bring Trey Ford in. And I certainly thought that starting Trey Ford in the game at home against Edmonton was a good thing for Winnipeg, because, again, we knew what they were going to do. They were going to do whatever they could do to eliminate him running the football and force him to beat you with his arm, and he wasn't able to do that. I think he's an incredible athlete and a guy that will be on a CFL roster. I'm not convinced he's a guy that's going to be a starting quarterback for 18 games and to be able to compete with the likes of the Bombers or the Alouettes or even a team in BC. And to be honest, and again, this is probably more an off-season conversation, but I wouldn't at all be surprised if next year there's a new GM, a new head coach, and a new starting quarterback in Vernon David and in VA in Vernon Adams, because there will be a new home for him. And this is going to be a spot where they're going to prioritize the quarterback position, have an unquestioned number one, and I think they will go for there. Speaking of VA, his team, the Lions, lost again, having the Ticats come back against them in a game that the Ticats absolutely had to have. You look at the standings right now, and the BC Lions, after that great start, are under 500 at 7-8, clinging on to third place in their division. The Riders, for their part, are 7-1, half a game up. These teams do play head-to-head, not this week, but the following week, in a game that I think we can probably safely say will likely determine who is second place in the West. Although, and again, call it recency bias, call it what you want. I've been a lot more impressed with the Riders coming out of those games against Winnipeg than I have been with what BC's been doing lately. I mean, how do you, like, if we're assuming the Bombers are first, how are you handicapping this race for second?
I look at it like this, Huss. I'm with you. I think the Riders, if I'm putting my money on it, I think the Riders finish second and the Lions third for a couple different reasons. First off, the Riders seem to have broken their curse. You know, this whole idea of not being able to win after Labor Day weekend, that's now a thing of the past. They've now won twice here. I think that I like the play of Trevor Harris. I do think their defense is playing, solid. They take away the ball. Turnovers are huge. I'm with you as far as, I think a lot of that, if you look at the schedules, I mean, they both have their pluses and minuses, right? I mean, they both play each other. That's going to be an incredibly important game. They both have a game against the listless Calgary Stampeders. So I really do think it's going to come down to who's just got it. And right now, the Riders seem to have it. The Lions, I have no idea what the Lions are doing.
Their defense is brutal.
Their defense is awful. It's just absolutely horrendous. It's been awful for all season long. They're just bad. They just can't stop anybody. And, you watch this like a slow car accident. The Ticats slowly climb back into that game. You saw BC tie it, force it to overtime, and then lose it. I just feel like that, inside the BC locker room, I've said this over and over and over again, Huss, on this show, in columns. The BC Lions have benefited from continuity like the Bombers have over the last X amount of years. I know they've changed. They've seen players come in. They've seen players leave. Much of those decisions have been Lions-based, and so, you look at the team that's kind of should be benefiting by this year. This should be the year. I think that's why a lot of people, myself included, saw this as the Lions' year to finally, come out of the West and to win, the Grey Cup after, on home soil, after all, for the first time since 2011. And yet, it's the same team that just seems to have issues winning and issues losing. Like, they seem like an immature team. Talent, ton of it, overflowing in talent. But it just seems like an immature team that does not know how to ride the waves, the inevitable ups and downs of a CFL season, and it seems to weigh on them more than anybody. I think another big thing in this, Huss, and we talked about this when Nathan Rourke got acquired, was signed to that 3-year contract, was that Rick Campbell needed to handle this situation very delicately, very professionally, but also straightforward. And I'm just not sure if that's happened. And it feels like, there's a lot of guys in that locker room. Now, this is speculation. I don't have a ton, I have reports coming out of it that there's, a divide. I would imagine there's still a tight team as far as a locker room goes. But it just seems like watching Nathan Rourke, it's like this club hasn't embraced him. Like, almost kind of like that. I don't even know how to describe it. It almost feels like he's just, he's almost doing things himself. He doesn't seem like he's in that rhythm with the offense as we saw him in 2022 when he set the league by storm. And I don't know if that's his teammates. I don't know if that's scheming. I don't know what it is, but it's just not working. And the body language of the BC Lions is creeping back into that beaten down, when they should be ignoring these things, right? The best teams in the league, it's, short memories. It seems like this team weighs all their, weighs down on all their losses and is just way too happy about all their victories. And you saw Rick Campbell after the game get visibly frustrated for some of his play calling. Like, he's now snapping at media members. And it's like, it just seems like a mess going on there. It doesn't seem like anybody has the answer. And the reality is you can't just Nathan Rourke your way out of this one. You need to be playing complementary football. You're not a good enough team to have one unit carry the rest. You need to be a complete team. And the BC Lions, for one reason or another, just haven't been able to find that mix. And I don't have any trust in them. What's your take on the quarterback situation? Because I still would go with Nathan Rourke. I still don't think that's the wrong choice.
No.
But it just seems like it's blowing up in their faces.
It's such a unique scenario, and I don't begrudge them at all for doing what they had to do to get him to sign in, and it was a real bitter pill and probably, frankly, unfair, as professional sports often is, for Vernon Adams. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago. I mean, the way they brought in VA after that first half a couple weeks ago was a real head-scratcher. And I think Rick Campbell needs to own a little bit of the way that this has been handled and the fact that the rest of the team hasn't backed it up. To me, like I mentioned just how bad their defense is. I mean, this is not a championship football team right now. Their offense at their best is probably Grey Cup level, but there's a lot of other components that make a championship football team, and they don't have it right now. There is a path right now, and as much as we kind of are putting a fork in the Elks and saying that they're done, like BC's schedule is like they're at home to Calgary. They have if they lose to Calgary this week, I mean, it is game on because
we're talking crossover from the East. We're talking a bunch of stuff.
Well, well, here's the thing. I mean, I think it would just maybe take them out and have the Elks pop in. Like they would have to lose out for Hamilton to be able to get a crossover.
Right.
Which I don't think will happen. But if Edmonton can win and stay in it, their final two games are at Saskatchewan, which will basically determine second place. If they were to lose that game and be at 8-9 going into their last game of the season, they've got the Montreal Alouettes. This isn't in week 21. This is in week 20. And Montreal already knows that they're going to have a bye in the Eastern semifinal. I don't expect the Alouettes are going to dress all their top guys in the final week of the regular season against the Bombers. So they could very well play their guys and play to win in that final week. And if BC were to lose to Saskatchewan and to lose to Montreal, the Elks would obviously, they have to beat Saskatchewan to even be in this conversation. Their final two games at Calgary and then home to the Argos, who will already know that they'll be playing next week in the Eastern semi and might be resting their guys. So they are not out of the woods just yet. I think the Riders, we can book them in. They're in the playoffs. And wouldn't that be incredible if BC, and this is just the one other thing from BC, and I know we got to move on, but Amar Doman has done such a great job with that team, reinvesting in it, building it up in the community. The hopes were so high this year. You add in Nathan Rourke. You think about the start. They're hosting the Grey Cup.
Bring back Matthew Betts.
There's Matthew Betts, perfect example. There are some seriously tight collars, I think, right now in BC Lions management because of what they put in and how poorly they have produced in the last 2 months of the season. So, I mean, I
will rain a little bit on one of your comments, though. Jason Moss reminds me a heck of a lot like Mike O'Shea. And Mike O'Shea, when he locked up first with a month to go, his plan was to sit all his players in week 20 and play them in week 21 to a certain degree so that they didn't go 3 weeks without playing a single game or a month.
I'm not saying it will happen,
I'm
but
just saying
it's very much in the realm of possibility that
100%.
game could be Montreal playing for it just because of that final week. It'd be hilarious to see Moss go in and play that game. I mean, that Winnipeg Montreal game in the final week could potentially be of two teams that have already in fact, it likely will be teams that know they're going to have another week off. Anyways, The West has been crazy all season long. And we continue to focus on that. But let's move over to the East. The Alouettes, despite losing last week, clinch first on account of the Ottawa Red Blacks' loss to the Saskatchewan Roughriders. The Argos get a huge win against Montreal, and the battle is on for second in the East. Ottawa isn't trending well. They are a half game up, or a tie up, if you will, on Toronto. Who do you think hosts that East semifinal, Jeff?
I'm riding with the Argos on this one. I just, there's something about Ottawa that's just, I mean, it's not hard to put your finger on. They're not getting the quarterback play they need. Drew Brown's still dealing with his ankle injury. You have to wonder how much was affecting him, how much that injury might have been affecting him prior to sitting out last week and getting injured the week before, because he wasn't playing that well before he got injured and had to miss time. So Jeremiah Masoli, great story. Glad he's able to extend his career. He certainly had some great moments this season, but he's just not the guy who's going to lead a team, to the glory land, if you will. And so, you add in the fact that Darius Pickett, their best defensive player, arguably their best defensive player, if not their best defensive player, him being out for the rest of the season, and they are just reeling. They're feeling it, and they're not, they didn't look good at all this past weekend. And I think they should be concerned about their fate in the East, especially with the Ticats, clawing at that spot. I'm not saying it will be, they've certainly done enough at the beginning of the season to give themselves a few outs here. That's for sure. I mean, but the last 2 weeks they've been able to clinch a playoff spot with a victory. And this is coming after 2 seasons, Huss, where they finished dead last in the East and haven't even, tasted playoffs. So don't tell me that, you can't tell me that this isn't something that they want badly. And it would have looked the last 2 weeks as trying to secure, but they were unable to do it. And it's not for a lack of trying, despite, some of their play over the last two weeks. But I just look at the Argos, I think that was I don't want to say a defining victory against the Montreal Alouettes, because I don't think the Montreal Alouettes are playing their best football right now either. But I'm more convinced with just the health of the Toronto Argonauts, and I like their, I really do like their quarterback play better. Chad Kelly, is who he is, but if we're going strictly on an ability to play, he's a better quarterback right now. I think he's finding that chemistry with his receivers. Kadeem Carey is lighting it up, in the run game. And if he continued to play anything near like he played last week, that they'll be a very, very dangerous attack. Their defense is better. I just think that they're a better team. And so, another thing too, Huss, I mean, you go look at the schedule watching. It's not easy sledding for the Red Blacks. I think that the Argos have a better schedule to close out the season, and that's despite returning back from this. They're on the bye this week to play the red hot Winnipeg Blue Bombers at Princess Auto Stadium in their first game back. They play Ottawa, another situation similar to what we were talking about with the West, with BC and Saskatchewan, and Toronto plays Ottawa at home. I'm telling you right now, it is difficult to win games on the road, no matter what market you're in. For some reason, and I've seen it firsthand, I've covered this league for years, it is not easy to win in Toronto, and I do not see the Red Blacks showing up there, depending on where their health is, because I really do believe Drew Brown needs to get back to, the way he was playing for them to even have a chance at second. But at this point, looking at where they are, that game, the play against are obviously, like that other series, is going to determine a lot. But then, then Toronto plays the Elks. We'll see where the Elks are at. Red Blacks play the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and whether the Hamilton Tiger Cats are going to have a shot of making the playoffs, we'll see. They're still going to be a hard team to beat out this season. So I just think, would I be surprised or shocked if the Red Blacks finish second? No, I just think with the way the teams are trending right now, I think the Argos, I'd put my money on the Argos all day to finish.
I'm with you too. I mean, to me, the biggest reason is that they're playing head to head. They've got that home game, even knowing that they've got to come to Princess Auto Stadium and play this game. But let's move to the Ticats, because I've been waiting to cross them off the list.
You have been.
For the last 4 weeks,
not to.
And they keep on winning. And I mean, a quick funny story. I was at this bar in Montreal watching the Bomber game. And then, of course, the second half of the doubleheader started. Well, by the time it started out in Montreal, it was like 10:30 or so. So this place closed at 12. So I thought of the first half and then a little bit of the second. And I think they were up by 13 or 16 at that point, and couldn't believe what I saw when I ended up coming back and seeing the way that that game finished up. They've won 4 in a row. They are the hottest team right now. And stop me if you heard this before, every time the hottest team goes and plays the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. But you pointed this out. This is not a team that the Bombers have had. This maybe is the toughest place for them to play in the league over the course of the last, these years that they've been this championship team. So the Ticats let's see. The Ticats have the Bombers at home this week. When you look at the CFL standings, they have to win out if they want to make the playoffs. I guess there is a scenario where they go 2-1 and the Argos lose out and they could get third because they have the tiebreaker from the season sweep of the Argos.
Season sweep, yeah.
Which is significant. I'd almost think that, and again, they have to beat Winnipeg, and that is a big, big if. But if they somehow find a way to beat the Bombers this week, Ottawa is in Montreal, Ottawa is in Toronto, and then week 21, Hamilton at Ottawa. Ottawa, to me, isn't out of the woods yet. But as far as the Ticats go, Bo Levi's slinging it again. He's not making the mistakes that cost him his job earlier this year, and he's doing all the things that have kept him at the top of the league in passing statistics. And I got to say, I'm not surprised that this is a pretty short number with the Bombers being... The Bombers would be favored, I think, by 4 over just about anybody in the league right now, outside of maybe Montreal with the record that they put forth. And there is some life back in this Tiger Cats team, and dare I say, you're going to get to the donut box on Friday night, and there's going to be some belief in the stands that this team might be able to continue this incredible Houdini act and stay in the mix.
Absolutely. And we've been talking about this for a while. It's becoming more and more believable, Haas. It still doesn't feel totally believable at this point, but if things can go right for the Hamilton Tiger Cats this weekend, and by right, I mean a couple different things. Obviously, they need to beat the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. It's going to be a tough, tall order. They're facing the Bombers arguably at their hottest right now and healthiest. But here's the thing, man. I finally went back and I found the last time that the Winnipeg Blue Bombers won in Hamilton. It was August 12th, 2017. That was the last time the Winnipeg Blue Bombers won in Hamilton in a regular season game. I don't need people yelling at me saying they beat the Ticats in the Grey Cup or at home. I know, I was there. I covered it. But they haven't beat them for a regular season game, and I have been to those regular season games since then. And I can tell you, I've never seen Mike O'Shea more mad outside in doing a post-game interview than he has been at Tim Hortons Field, where they just can't seem to buy a victory. And there's a couple different things about that. First off, they never played in 2021 for the short season. They only play them once they're being, not in the same division. They only travel to Hamilton once a year. So it's not like Hamilton has this 15 and 16-0 record or something over the last X amount of years here. They just, for whatever reason, when it comes to the regular season, the Bombers can't seem to get the job done here. And it's been a mixed bag of players. I remember Dane Evans came in and his season was over essentially. And he came in and he chucked five touchdowns, I believe, his first ever game scoring, passing for 5 touchdowns. And all of a sudden his career was resurrected. Anyways, moving on. I think that with this week, so first off, they need to beat the Bombers. They need the Lions to lose to the Stampeders. Now, what's the odds of that happening? Probably not that great. But that's for them to catch up to that Lions, in that West factor. I mean, they need the teams above them, obviously, to lose games. But there are certain – if those two things happen, if for some reason the Lions continue their skid – and they go and they lose to the Stampeders, and if the Ticats are able to beat the Winnipeg Blue Bombers at home, I think the conversation we have next week will be a lot more serious.
Well, they also need Saskatchewan.
Chances.
Like, I think it's way more likely that they make it in the East than the West. I mean, like, what would have to happen for them to be the third place team in the West, like no other West team getting to 9 wins is...
Well, they would, yeah, no. Well, you think the East is, I don't think I think that the way the Lions are trending, I think that, and this is assuming the Elks don't make things interesting, obviously, as you went into a couple segments ago. I mean, I don't think either are easy, Huss, but when you look at the standings, do you think that what's more likely? Ottawa and Toronto? Like, Ottawa has 8 victories already and a tie. So Hamilton, I don't think
Ottawa needs to lose out. Ottawa needs to either lose out. Toronto would need to go 1-2, and the Ticats need to run the table.
Let's assume they win 1 game. Toronto, are we really expecting them to slow down here or not win 1 game? I think the more likely is that you see a pure collapse from BC or Saskatchewan.
Toronto can go 1-2. If Toronto,
exactly.
if Toronto goes win a game. No, but if Hamilton goes 3-0 and Toronto goes 1-2, Toronto's out. Hamilton's in.
Yeah. So I guess that
got
one,
the tiebreaker.
I would put that. Yes, I would put that maybe as a slightly better odd to happen, but I still don't, asking for, 1-2, I guess that's not impossible for Toronto. They do play in Winnipeg, so that's not going to be an easy game, and Winnipeg is going to want to beat the bricks off Toronto. They don't like that team. I know they're not divisional foes, so that, there is a challenge there for sure. In my opinion, those are the 2 most likely things to happen. Either Toronto finishes 1-2 and Hamilton finds a way to go 3-0 to finish out, or BC Lions fall off a cliff and Hamilton Tiger-Cats find a way to eclipse them.
Like the fact that we're even talking about this, credit to Milanovic, Bo, and everyone in Hamilton. I mean, we are talking about a scenario where they go from 2-9 to 9-9.
And at a time when we were treating them like we treat the Calgary Stampeders now, like they weren't even in the conversation, even when they had.
And how would that be? That would basically mean a Hamilton crossover would mean Bo Levi Mitchell bringing the Ticats into Mosaic to play the Riders. Wouldn't that be something? Hey, one other thing that came out of the weekend, and stop me if you've heard this before. A Saskatchewan member of the Saskatchewan Roughriders flagged for a reckless and excessively dirty play. This time it was Riders DB Deontay Williams ejected at the end of the game for, and again, as a wrestling fan, there's probably about 5 different names that have been used for this move, a brain buster, a suplex, body slam, whatever you want to call it. Khalil Pimpleton got slammed on his head at the end of the game. That's another week that a rider is suspended for a dirty or illegal play. Certainly it has been a big topic in Winnipeg coming out of the Labor Day game and the Banjo Bowl. Is this a coincidence or is this a trend that the Saskatchewan Roughriders are playing far beyond the line, as they call it in professional football?
So we don't know what exactly the punishment's going to be for Williams just yet. I don't think it's been announced. What has been...
Do you think it'll be a game or no?
I do think it will be a suspension. I'll explain kind of why. But we don't know the extent of the punishment just yet. We do know that Williams met with the CFL in a hearing to go over the play, to talk about the incident. He shared that with media. I thought his comments were, it's hard to, I read them, so I didn't see it, in an interview process or anything like that. So it's hard to read the body language or whatever. The words on the surface seem genuine. He reached out to Khalil Pimpleton. He apologized. Pimpleton accepted his apology, replied with a Bible verse that I know Williams really appreciated in the story that I read. So I mean, in that respect, I think those are the right channels to take. I do think he gets suspended. I think he gets suspended for a couple different reasons. I mean, we're not far removed from the CFL issuing a memo to all teams talking about heightened penalties on quarterbacks. Now, I know this wasn't a a move on a quarterback. But I still think that player safety and key, dangerous hits or dangerous illegal plays, whether it's on a quarterback or not, are going to be treated the same way with a heightened awareness. I just think that memo was brought out to warn, players to not go, I guess, as hard after quarterbacks, right? We all know the importance of quarterbacks in this league. You got to take into consideration the time of this incident, Huss. There were 6 seconds remaining in the game, and the Riders were up by multiple scores. Now, if this was a 1-score game, if this was earlier or with more time left on the clock, where a multiple score game, because we all know how crazy the CFL is, and you don't want to get burnt on plays. Then even then I could understand it more. But in this instance, the game was out of reach. It wasn't. There was no risk of the Riders losing that game, and it just wasn't necessary. And I thought, there were some comments made after the game. Dominique Rhymes made a particular comment I think resonated well, and that he just kind of talked about the Rough Riders and how this always happens with them, and what a complete disregard for player safety, for your fellow football player who the rigors and the dangers of playing the game, and they also know very well what happens when you get injured, and your earning potential. It's literally taking money out of your pocket. I just think it's inexcusable, and a message needs to be sent. I don't care if your intent wasn't to hurt. If you look at the video, it looks awful. He lands right on his head, as that photo in the corner of this picture shows. It just looks bad, and it needs to be handled. It needs to be handled by the CFL. It needs to be handled by the Rough Riders. And to answer the question here, is it fair to call the Riders dirty? I think there's an argument for it. I think if someone wanted to go out there and show the fact that they'll be now punished 4 different players on extracurricular activities, particularly when it comes to the quarterback, and several of those cases, you could make that argument. Do I think that they're a dirty group of guys that are all bad characters off the field and whatever? No, I don't think that. In fact, I've come on this show in the past and talked about how I think they've cleaned up their image. That the locker room the culture seems a lot more team first rather than individuals, as I think we saw a lot under Craig Dickinson's reign. Here's the issue I have with it. Whether it's unlucky, whatever you want to classify it up to, that argues against being dirty, something needs to change. And Corey Mace saying after the game that I guess our players need to work on winning with class. I think he's got too much on his plate, and I think it's a complete lack of respect for Corey Mace as a head coach. I honestly think player behavior, whether it's a 15-yard penalty, undisciplined play to extend a drive, whether it's pile driving a guy in his head at the end of the game, whether it's a headshot at opposing team's quarterback, as we saw in Labor Day weekend with Zach Collaros and Miles Brown, who the next week happened to fall unfortunately into Chris Strevler and end his career, despite being fined significantly more money for that hit than he was fined for the headshot against Zach Collaros a week before. At the end of the day, man, you need to reel in your players because they represent your organization. And I know I'm being a little bit hard on Corey Mace right now. I think the criticism falls directly on Jeremy O'Day, who's been through this, been through the Garrett Marino situation, the AC Leonard ripping into the, drug tester in the past. I just think I think you need to show some accountability. And if they had more respect for their coach, I think they wouldn't be doing what we're seeing this year.
Well, listen, you can maybe blame it on the individuals, but listen, football teams, for the most part, take on the identities of their coaches or a good coach. And I think you've made some great points earlier on in the season about how it did seem like that culture has been changing, and they have been buying into what Corey Mace has been saying. I don't really buy that they're buying into everything that he's saying, except they're going to go and have all of these incidents happen. Listen, the guy's a defensive coach. This is a tough sport. Well, we don't hear everything publicly that is being said in the locker room. And I think he wants his team playing on the edge. But unfortunately, they've been way beyond that line way too often this year. And that is something that they're going to need to get figured out, because if you want to compete with the likes of the Bombers and the Alouettes and the best team in this league, the one thing you can't do is be undisciplined, to be handing over 15 yards. Now, listen, if you're going out headhunting, trying to take out quarterbacks, yeah, okay, that can maybe have a big benefit to you in the long run. But, I mean, to me, this kind of does fall on the leader of this team. That's Corey Mace. I think he's been given, a few mulligans, if you will, for what these guys have done before. But if this continues, I don't think he'll get that same benefit of the doubt. And to be honest, in this case, it looked terrible and we'd be talking about it one way or the other. But I think it's more of an issue right now because of everything that had been piling up all year with the Riders that led into this. And certainly it's not just people in Winnipeg that have their great rivalry with the Riders that are talking about it. It's people around the Canadian Football League. We talked about the MLP race last week, and it's been the most fun conversation weekly on this program. I'm going to quote some odds from our friends over at CoolBet, because Jeff, last Monday, and we did the show early, we were on Winnipeg Sports talking the lock shop, and we had the latest MOP odds, and Corey Fajardo was still a massive favorite at that time. I think it was like minus 380 or minus 400, something like that. It was literally Fajardo, huge gap in everyone else. Brady Oliveira was plus 1,400, which was 14-1. Bo Levi Mitchell at the time was 25-1. Advance a week. The odds now are Fajardo minus 154, so he's still certainly the betting favorite. I've never seen a number crater like this. Brady Oliveira from last week to this week has gone from 14-1 to plus 140 and seems to be the odds-on favorite to be the West nominee one way or the other. And your guy Bo, who is leading the Canadian Football League by like 900 yards in passing, by 4 touchdowns right now, and has won 4 games in a row to drag this Ticats team back into the fight, is at 10-1. Could we see Oliveira, Bo Levi Mitchell matchup representing the West and the East for the MOP?
I think this weekend catapulted those guys into a two horse race.
Fajardo still is in it. I mean, he is.
I don't think he is. I don't think he is.
Well, what if the Ticats just lose and now they're two meaningful games and they're out?
That's the thing. So, does that play into it? I think the conversation needs to be less about the Hamilton Tiger-Cats and whether or not they're going to make the playoffs anymore. Look, they've put together a good stretch of football here. If they just miss out on the playoffs, if they just fall a bit short, does that exclude the season that Bo Levi Mitchell has had? I don't think so. I mean, personally, we talked about this, as you mentioned. I feel like this has been a weekly conversation, and Cody Fajardo, for good reason, has headlined those conversations for several weeks, including the weeks in which he was injured. It just seemed like nobody was necessarily moving into that role, or nobody was standing out. But for me, now we're seeing some impressive playing. And whether you want to call it recency bias, whatever you want to refer to it as, Cody Fajardo just has not played like the league's most outstanding player for the last month and a bit. I mean, look at the numbers of him coming back since he's been back. Okay, so he returns in week 12. Okay, 336 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Unbelievable. That's the guy. That's the Cody Fajardo who comes back into play and is returns to the front runner of the MOP race. But then you go and you look at his last 4 games, 240 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 204 passing yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 1 rushing TD, 226 passing yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 1 rushing TD. And then this past week, which I thought played okay, 225 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. I'm not saying that Cody Fajardo is completely eliminated from the conversation, but when you look at what Bo Levi Mitchell has been posting, this guy has been, he's been mobile. I'm not going to be pointing at his rushing yards, per se and arguing, necessarily on that case, but he's getting up there to what I think would be a mark that was set more than a decade ago because he is more active. He shed a bunch of weight. His passing yards are there. Like, look at the CFL stats, man. Look at Cody Fajardo. He's got 2,867 passing yards, 15 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. Bo Levi Mitchell has 4,359 passing yards, the most in the league, 26 passing touchdowns, and 14 interceptions. Now, I know that's twice as many interceptions as Cody Fajardo, but I'm just saying the level of playing, this most outstanding. I just feel like I'm buying into the Bo Levi Mitchell camp now. I'm buying into this is a guy who was incredibly hard on him too. And
let me just take the other side of this because
of course, please do.
Hamilton, had that horrible start. They were 2-9. Bo got benched and came back in. This team was playing in a lot of blowouts and a lot of garbage time, and I do think that some of those numbers that Bo achieved earlier on in the season, certainly not in the last month, were maybe a little bit of inflated because of everything that was going on around them. And, you got teams for 2 quarters playing prevent defense and, you're going to get yours. Like, what he's done in the past month has been awesome. And, it started off before that. Like, they were becoming more competitive. It's just crazy to think that the MOP nominee from the East could be a team that finishes out of the playoffs and a guy that got benched at a time this year. However, it also speaks to just how weird this season has been. I will ask you, because you vote and you're on the panel and the guys. Like last year, it seemed like Chad Kelly did not have all the best numbers in the league, but he was the starting quarterback on a team that went 16-2 and was the best team in the league for 18 games. How much do the voters put in winning? Because that's the one thing Hamilton hasn't done enough. And right now they're on like this great run and we're thinking, oh man, look how good he's been this past month and everything's there. But the fact of the matter is this team was 2-9 and needs an absolute miracle to actually be playing in the playoffs in a team where 6 of 9 teams make it.
I think there's a couple things. Now, this is just my personal opinion. It's not like I have statistics that back this up. I think when you look at last season, okay, first of all, Chad Kelly was arguably the best player on the best team in CFL history, right? They set, they went 16-2, right? Like there's not, that was a historic season for them. I also think that that the fans were tired of giving it to a Winnipeg Blue Bomber.
Agreed.
I think that, they were, Zach won 2 years in a row. I think Zach was a better quarterback than the guy over in Toronto and Chad Kelly. So, Brady Oliveira had such a special season that he was the nominee. And that's kind of the issue with some of these awards too, Huss, is that, winning is one of them. Certainly people, I think it was a difficult decision last year in the sense that no one popped out. I think, obviously you obviously had Brady Oliveira, and I thought Zach Collaros might have been 2. And then you had Chad Kelly leading the 16-2 Argos, a guy who, put up decent stats. He wasn't leading the CFL in passing yards and touchdown passes and whatever, but he wasn't 6th and 5th like we see Cody Fajardo is in the stats. He was middling, but he wasn't that low in a 9-team league. The other thing too is, and there's been chatter every single year about changing the rules when it comes to voting. Because if you look at, look right here in Winnipeg, I know Zach Collaros is not, there's no longer that race between him and Brady. Brady looks like the winner coming out of Winnipeg because you got to be voted out of your respective team first. But if you like and are convinced and like what Tyrell Ford has been doing, one off leading the league in interceptions and playing exceptionally well, in what's been a terrific Bombers defense. Well, both of them can't be nominated for most outstanding player. So one will end up probably getting nominated for most outstanding defensive player. Well, Brady Oliveira, there is no offensive player of the year. So that usually goes to the MOP. So there's a little bit of bias there.
Well, I'll say this about Brady right now. And I mean, the knock on him was, he wasn't getting into the end zone. Well, okay, he's got his 3 touchdowns. Strevler still leads the league. Those are all 1-yard dives that I don't know how much you want to take away from a guy. If he's not getting the ball there, how is he going to get it in? But Brady now leads the league in rushing, ahead of Stanback. He's over 1,100 yards. He's over 400 yards receiving. He is now 1,500 combined with 3 games left in the season, and has been, I mean, I think unquestionably, while Zach did struggle at times this season, has been the catalyst of the Bomber offense. It has been consistent as anyone after about the first couple weeks of the season and has played into it. And I do think, and as someone with a Brady Oliveira plus 1,400 ticket, I'm feeling pretty good about the fact that there was a lot of discussion that maybe he got shortchanged last year. And often, like we've seen, a guy deserved it, oh, not, you sort of get the benefit of the doubt. And both of the guys that we're talking about in the East, very much, flawed candidates in some ways. And that's been what we've been talking about all season long. We don't have the obvious candidates that we did last year. I mean, if you put Oliveira's 23 season, Caleros' 23 season, Kelly's 23 season, this would be not a conversation this year, but it just speaks to just the wild year that we've had in the Canadian Football League. Just a quick update for those of you, and if you do go over to CoolBet, here's where things are. Follow the money if you're wondering where things are really at. Cody Fajardo, the favorite right now, minus 154, quarterback of the league-leading Montreal Alouettes. Brady Oliveira, as I mentioned, has gone from plus 1,400 to plus 140. I've never seen anything like that in a week. Bo Levi Mitchell is at 10-1, and then it's 55-1. I mean, basically, this tells us that this is a 3-horse race. Brady Oliveira is going to be the Western Division guy, and there still is a path for Bo Levi Mitchell if they win these games coming up.
That's the thing. That's the best. That's your best bet is for your best bet for your money is the 10-1 on Bo Levi Mitchell, because to your point, Huss, if he does win, it's, if they win these next few games and he can somehow get the Ticats into the playoffs, I almost feel like it's.
I think that'll be the story. Conclusion. And listen, again, everything that happened at the start of the first half of the season will be forgotten if he can get them into the playoffs. That being said, he's got a pretty good Blue Bomber defense to run in. Grey Cup odds right now, Alouettes are still a favorite at plus 175. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers are second at plus 265. Again, these are all available at coolbet.com. BC 4-1, Argos 7-1, Riders 11-1. Red Blacks 13, Edmonton's back to 30, Ticats at 50, and the Stamps at 100-1, still not technically sold out. Hey, one just quick one before we go, because I know we got to run. Some good news. I could not believe that the Vancouver Canucks had a game scheduled going up against the Grey Cup, and it sounds like that has been rectified. We've seen a NHL schedule change here in Winnipeg in the previous years, tied in with the playoffs. But, the biggest game in Canada every year should not be going up head-to-head in any NHL market with the game. And it sounds like the common sense has prevailed on this.
Could you just imagine the logistics of that, though? Like, they're right beside each other, man. It's not even like it's, just the courtesy of not overlapping times and giving, the CFL, its moment, especially when it's in your backyard. But the logistics of having that many people in and around that area would be brutal. So to your point, I'm glad common sense prevailed. It should have prevailed. For some reason, I thought it already prevailed. Maybe it was I read that or saw that and immediately thought it would be fixed and figured it would be fixed by the next morning. It took a bit of time, but yeah, it makes sense to move that, not just for the CFL, but also for the Canucks fans.
Well, I would love that these two leagues work together a little bit more, because it is a joke that Winnipeg fans are going to have to choose between a huge game between the Bombers and the Argos at Princess Auto Stadium and the Jets home opener at the exact same time on opposite ends of the city. But I will pick my battles. I've ranted enough about that sort of thing over the years. But, the CFL schedule is out so far in advance. I know. Well, listen, here in Winnipeg, TSN does the Bomber games. TSN is a huge part of the Canadian Football League. They do, and does the Winnipeg Jets games as well for the local broadcasts. They can't be happy about it. But again, sometimes there are higher powers that determine these things. But it is really unfortunate for Winnipeg fans to either have to miss the Bombers or missed the Jets home opener, and it would have been embarrassing, frankly, I think, for the Canucks, for the NHL, if they were actually going to go play a game at the same time as the Grey Cup. Glad that is not happening.
It would have been written over and over again throughout Grey Cup week.
Oh, so, no kidding. No kidding.
It would have. A favor.
Hey, listen, a big shout out again to our friends at Garage Living Winnipeg. Check out their amazing work at garageliving.com on the website. And if you'd like more information or maybe a free in-garage consultation, or pop down to their showroom to find out more about what can be done to revolutionize your space in your garage, give our pal Pat Knuga a call, 204-999-1234. Just 3 games on the docket today. For those of you that follow the Lock Shop on Edmonton Sports Talk, Dustin Nielsen and I will get into our CFL picks tomorrow, noon Winnipeg time, live on the Edmonton Sports Talk YouTube channel. And, of course, we get at it with the doubleheader, including Bombers, Ticats on Friday night. Hammer in the hammer. Great stuff as always. Have a good trip out there, and we'll see you when you get back.
Always a pleasure, my friend. Let's do it again next week.
You got it. Thanks again for joining us, everybody. Tell a friend about CFL 110. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get Winnipeg Sports Talk and any of your other favorite pods. Just type in CFL 110. For Jeff Hamilton, I'm Andrew Paterson. Enjoy the games this week, and we will see you next week right here on CFL 110.
You've been listening to CFL 110. Tune in next week for more great Canadian football discussion.